Hey, this is Entropy Aviation in Boston, Jeremy 77. I have some good news and some bad news. Well, the good news is that I'm going to keep covering some cool stuff that I find worth your time and is going to be fun and show off some cool products that are either already released or updated or coming out, and this details one of them. The bad news is that I'm also going to start covering some stuff that you should never, ever buy, because that would be supporting terrible developers. But that's a separate story. More on that later tonight in a separate video. For now, I have some good stuff. The FS Academy Navigator. This is not released yet. This is coming later this week. It's been submitted to Orbix Sim Market, the marketplace within the Sim. FS Academy Navigator, brand new package. Who is FS Academy? This is an airline pilot. I believe he flies A320s. They have been instrumental in helping Microsoft get some of those new flying tutorials, but those are fairly basic. If you want to go more in depth, he's got VFR, IFR, and Jetliner packages out there that will teach you these concepts in more depth, right? So this one here basically is what I would do initially if you're interested in flight simulation, if you're interested in learning how to navigate purely visually in VFR flight. If you want to do those bush trips, if you're a fan of bush trips like I am, you would definitely dig this. I think this is a great way to introduce how to do it right. A lot of the concepts that many people think about, or maybe don't think about. But how do you deal with wind and how that affects your direction and drifting that occurs as a result of that? How do you properly navigate using line features like roads, your lakes, your coastlines, your landmarks, things like that? How is seasonal variation going to affect VFR navigation? So doing things in the winter versus summer. How about day versus night? How do you deal with ATC restrictions over zones? All of these subjects are covered in this package. You get to test your skills later on in a bush trip that will put all of these skills that you gradually build up as the course progresses, that will put it to a good test. I wanted to show you really quick an example of David's teaching style and how this is presented. So essentially, he's going to cover these topics in theory, then he's going to ask you to do certain things to demonstrate that theory. He's going to make corrections if you don't do things quite right. And there's also a manual that accompanies all of these products, and Navigator is no exception, where these things are outlined in the ground school that you can read about before you jump into the practical lesson and try to perform these tasks yourself. So this is an example of wind correction and how to account for it. So I'm going to be quiet and let David take over for now.
At the southern end of Fuerteventura, one of the Canary Islands. The Canaries are a series of mostly volcanic islands situated around 100 kilometers off the west coast of Africa, out in the Atlantic Ocean. It's common to have strong winds across the Canaries, which is where Fuerteventura gets its name. Up until now, we have been flying in very light wind conditions, but today we find ourselves with a strong 30 knots wind from the west. As we continue to fly north, the wind is blowing from our left, meaning it is pushing us to the right of course. The direction we point the aeroplane's nose is called our heading, whereas the path we cover over the ground is our track. The difference between our heading and track is a result of the wind and is known as our drift angle. How much drift we can expect is based on the speed and direction of our aircraft and the speed and direction of the wind. Wind is always reported with reference to the direction from which it blows. This wind is blowing from the west, which is 270 on the compass, with a speed of 30 knots. Therefore it is reported as 270 at 30. ground speed is the speed at which we cover the ground below us, and it depends on if the wind is acting as a headwind or a tailwind. As the wind is currently fully to our left, it is not affecting our ground speed, as there is neither a headwind nor tailwind component. This means that as we are flying at 100 knots indicated airspeed, we can expect our ground speed to also be 100 knots. As we climb higher and the air becomes thinner, our ground speed will become greater than our indicated airspeed, but for now we will consider them to be equal. Now please make a turn directly into wind onto heading 270.
Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and make a turn at 270. We are supposed to maintain 100 knots from the previous lessons before, but I'm going to go ahead and let that slip away from me. Watch what happens.
Please maintain 100 knots for this part of the exercise.
There you go. So that's the correction that occurs when you're not doing things right. And I'm making my turn towards heading 270 now. Maintaining about 4,000 feet.
Now we are facing directly into the wind, meaning we have a 30 knots headwind. This means that although our indicated airspeed remains the same at 100 knots, we are now fighting against 30 knots of headwind, so our ground speed will be just 70 knots. This will slow our progress, and so we would account for this when planning a flight in order to get accurate leg timings. Note that in aerodynamic terms, the aircraft itself...
So, this is a quick example of how the product teaches you its topics. And I just wanted to show you this thing before it comes out.